Okay, now it is my privilege to introduce the moderator of our long program today. It's Marc Stiles, and Marc is an award-winning journalist covering commercial real estate and government for the Puget Sound Business Journal. He is a local authority on breaking news in commercial real estate in our region, and he will lead us with a powerhouse panel discussion regarding a variety of critical storylines, including market trends, political implications resulting from district elections and affordable housing, with three of the region's most respected leaders who we will introduce. Take it away, Marc.
Good afternoon. It's an honor for the Puget Sound Business Journal editor Rob Smith and me to be here today. Thanks for having us. It was a real treat for me not to have to pack my lunch today. Hamilton McCullough has lined up a great panel of real estate experts. We've got Greg Johnson of Wright, Runstad and Company, Craig Kinzer of Kinzer Real Estate Services, and Diane Sugimura, who heads the city's Planning and Land Use Department. Thank you to the panelists. I'm going to have them introduce themselves in just a moment. Today, we are in the midst of one of the largest economic booms since the Denny Party arrived just over 163 years ago. As the commercial real estate reporter for the Business Journal, I see this every day and wonder how our current economic juggernaut compares with the gold rush or World War II. When military spending brought thousands of soldiers and sailors to our region and helped make Boeing a household name. How does today's bonanza compare to the dot-com boom of the late 1990s? Most of all, I ask myself how long this can last. That's what I hope we can get at today, where right now in downtown Seattle, 56 residential buildings are either planned, under construction, or were recently completed. Several companies, Starbucks, Nordstrom, Microsoft, Zillow, Tableau, etc., Boeing, are driving the ship. But you probably noticed on your way in today, 2 Amazon towers rising just across the street with more planned. Toyota's long tenure is ending this week on the block right across the way to make room for a 3rd block for Amazon, and a 4th block is planned too. Amazon, which is normally tight-lipped about its plans, which drives me crazy, rocked the city last year when the company's global facilities director publicly stated that the company plans to occupy a total of 10 million square feet of office in the city by about 2020. 10 million square feet. I wake up in the morning thinking about that. That's nearly 7 Columbia centers. More importantly, it's enough space for about 70,000 employees in downtown alone. Remember those numbers, because it is jobs and job growth that are at the foundation of commercial real estate. I'm going to have the panelists briefly introduce themselves, starting with Diane. Diane, tell us what DPD does, how many people work for the department, and what kind of personnel growth you've seen in the last few years.
Thank you, Marc. Department of Planning and Development works on a broad range of development activities, starting from comprehensive long-range planning, neighborhood plans, area-specific plans. We develop policies. To implement those plans, we develop the codes, and then we review the projects, issue permits, inspect the buildings, and do enforcement and rental registration inspections after that. We now have about 400 staff. During the downturn, we went down to 300. I had to lay off about 100 people and meet with each one individually. So we're pleased to have 400 staff at this point, and things are booming, thanks to these guys and others.
So, Greg, if you could go next, and I think we've got some slides that will go with his presentation, or his introduction.
And Craig's going to cooperate by being the slide changer. Yes, Vanna White. Well, I'm Greg Johnson, and president of Wright, Runstad and Company. We are a local real estate company well into our 5th decade delivering office space for the most part to the region. Pacific Northwest is really what we call home. And then we've undertaken about 16 million square feet over our company's history. But as we sit here today, we've got 2 of our largest projects ever. And I just have some images we can flip through real quickly. One of them is Rainier Square, the redevelopment of Rainier Square, which is located right in the Central Business District of Seattle. So we can flip through this. And just to orient you to the project, it's a 58-story tower right next to a 12-story hotel. And at the top of the 58-story tower is 181 residential units. That's your cue. And below that, from the ground up to the 37th floor is about 765,000 square feet of office space. Next, we've got retail space on the ground level, Fifth Avenue being one of the top retail streets on the whole West Coast. And next is the hotel, 12 stories, 155 rooms, and this will be a 4- or 5-star hotel. And then finally, the project complements the existing Rainier Tower, which will stay in its current form, and really we see ourselves as completing that block. You've got a very iconic building already there, and we've worked very hard to be complementary to it. And then across Lake Washington, we have another project, which is the single largest project Wright Runstad's ever taken on, the Spring District. And if we flip through this, it's kind of same kind of sequence. When we bought the property, you can see it in the foreground. We bought it from Safeway Corporation with a lot of warehouse space. You can see its proximity to downtown Bellevue. And as we click through, you'll see we've built some infrastructure. First phase of office and residential is underway right now. And as we flip through quickly, you'll get to the full 5.3 million square feet of space that has been entitled on that site. It will also have a station on it for the Eastlink extension of Sound Transit Light Rail. So we're as one could say, not only are we optimistic about this cycle, we're betting on this cycle.
So quick, before we go to Craig, Greg, have they started any construction of actual buildings in the Spring District? What's the timeline for the apartments and the office buildings, the first ones?
Sure. The apartments are going to start first. A 300-unit apartment project starts construction in April, next month, so we're 2 weeks away.
What about the office?
Office space, we're looking for an anchor tenant. We've got the buildings all designed and actively in discussions with several potential users. This is how our the interview goes each time.
During the conversation, just so if we got any news breaks, we'll have it. Craig?
My name is Craig Kinzer. I'm CEO of Kinzer Real Estate Services. We're a business that's been operating here in Seattle for about 23, 24 years. I came up here in '78 to go to the University of Washington and was a real estate attorney for a while, and then accountant, and then jumped into the business of real estate. And Greg and I are kind of bookends. In other words, he builds things, so he has lots of pretty pictures. I represent clients, and so I don't have the pretty pictures. We did have some slides, and I think what happened is the slides didn't come in, so I took a few notes. So here are some of the companies we represent that we're very fortunate to represent. Seattle Children's, the Research Center downtown, King County and the Mariners, Safeco Field. We do the City of Seattle, bought Key Tower for them. Port of Seattle, Russell Investments, you may know Russell Tower. We partnered Amazon and Children's in one of their latest buildings. We represent the University of Washington. Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation did their headquarters over by Seattle Center. And lastly, for 23 years, we've represented Starbucks. And I just left their annual meeting, and I was just shocked to hear that today they reached a capitalization or value of $70 billion, which is a lot of money. What also is unique about Seattle is they had up the 5 most respected and well-known brands in the world, And Seattle has 2 of the 5. Number 1 is Apple. Number 2 is Google. I forget number 3. Number 4 is Amazon, and number 5 is Starbucks. And so one of the reasons that we're doing so well is we've become a very diversified city. And one of the slides I brought, we go around and we do some presentations to CEOs as we try and brand Seattle outside of, our neighborhood here. Because the key to all of these companies, the key to this growth that Marc is talking about, the key to filling Greg's projects is retaining and hiring employees, pulling them into all of these jobs that are created. And so you want to really brand Seattle. And Seattle actually has been kind of hitting a little bit under its weight so far, if you compare it to Austin, Texas, and some others who've done a great job. When we go around and we're representing, Starbucks in other cities, or when we're with, doing something in London for Gates, we'll ask about Seattle, and this is what they say. It's Rains, Starbucks, they know Boeing, Microsoft, and they, funny enough, they know Nirvana, right? They think we're the music, right? But when you think about it, and this is just a sampling, we are so diversified. We have so many great brands, and Marc mentioned a number of them. And that's really the job of everybody here and everybody in Seattle is to let the world know that Seattle is really a first-class city, and that if you're looking for a place to land and have a job and a career and a family, this is a fantastic place to be. And so we talk about innovation. I'm going to pass through that. The other thing I would mention real quickly is we're becoming a city of innovation districts. We are the city of innovation. I continue to say that term because I really would like to see Seattle branded as the city of innovation. And Brookings Institute did a study about what an innovation district is. And here are some of the innovation districts you can see right here that are being set up around Seattle and Bellevue. And I think that is, again, one of the reasons why we're doing so well. And for our company, our real estate firm, while we are very busy right now.
Thank you. So let's put this in context with past cycles. So Diane, how would you characterize what's going on today with the dot-com boom?
So I did a little checking because Marc gave me a little hint ahead of time. And 2013, in terms of our volume and our value of permits, was higher than we've ever been, and that's even CPI adjusted. 2014, in terms of residential, I think we permitted something like 7,500 net new units. Over the past 10 years, we've averaged about 3,800, so that's kind of double what our average had been. Residential permits, we have something like 14,000 that are still, that have been issued and haven't been built. So I don't think I've seen it like this before. And I've been with the city way longer than some of you probably existed.
So Craig, what do you think about how this compares with past cycles? Is it a matter of the growth, so much of the growth being centered pretty much right across the street, or is it indeed true that what we're seeing today, as Diane's numbers show, that it really is busier than at any time in recent history?
So most people point to two things when they look at growth in Seattle. They point to Amazon, of course, and they point to interest rates, right? You have historically low interest rates. You have a third thing. You have an incredible amount of capital that is looking for a place to land. And Seattle is now on everybody's map. Depending on which rating agency you look at, it's somewhere between 6 and 14 from international investors. So when you have very low interest rates, a lot of capital coming in, and growth like Amazon, you have this incredible, kind of perfect storm, so to speak, that is giving us a very unique top of the cycle, or maybe continued top of the cycle. But what makes this even more, I think, different than the past is it's a very diversified growth. In other words, if you're looking at property types, this is the first cycle I can remember where you have such strong residential growth with commercial growth. And when you go and look at property, it's interesting. It used to be that it was clear that property, if it was zoned such that you could build either commercial, retail, or residential, you knew what you were going to do. Now, property is being priced where you really don't know whether it's going to be commercial or residential because residential is so strong. I don't think I've ever seen a cycle where there's so much residential at the same time commercial. And the good news about that, and of course South Lake Union is a great example, is you have this balance of work, play, live, and so you become, an 18-hour, maybe soon to be a 24-hour city, and you become a safer city. And the other thing that's happened that's made this cycle better is the city council has got it right, or the mayor has got it right, the administration, and we're looking at density. It used to be in the 80s, if you remember, there was a cap, right? And we wanted to stay provincial, and we didn't want too much development. I'm sure Greg remembers that, right? Well, now everyone understands that density is a good thing. You want the lowest cost of infrastructure per person, and that allows for better transportation, better services, et cetera, et cetera. And so with that added density, and this kind of three-legged stool of retail, commercial, and residential, you have a cycle that I think is very unique compared to the past.
And when people complain about density to me, I say, it's a great bargain on a house in Centralia if you'd like that. So, not that there's anything the matter with Centralia. Greg, what do you think in terms of this situation, how it compares with the late 90s, early 2000s?
Late 90s, early 2000s, we all saw what happens when companies start taking down more space than they actually need at the moment. They think they're going to grow on a curve that goes up forever, and so they procure space when they really don't have a firm need for it today. I think that's what's different now, is that the space that's being built from a commercial perspective is being occupied the day that it opens, and it's being occupied either by people that work for the companies that are leasing the space or for the companies that own the buildings. And so that gives us a lot more confidence as we look forward at this point, which is starting to get towards the top of the cycle, but the foundation feels firmer. And then I will also add that Seattle has made itself not just a great place to do business, but a great place to live. And so you actually, Craig talked about companies wanting to locate places where they can attract good talent. Well, there are people that actually move here because they like the quality of life and then go looking for a job. And that's a real plus when it comes to attracting those employers to fill the office building. So I'm still in the bullish mode from a growth standpoint.
That's interesting about Seattle being Seattle and attracting people. That's what brought me here. Mountains, ocean, cool people, great politics, and I stayed. So one question I want to make sure we ask is, how long can this last? I mean, really, remember in the late 90s, people of my era or my age thought, we're all going to retire at age 40. Woo, the party's on. And we know how that turned out. And remember the condo boom of 7, 8 years ago. We're all going to live downtown in shiny new towers. And it didn't happen. So why is this cycle, and you touched on this, we have a stronger foundation now, but why is this cycle different than the last cycle? We always have booms and busts.
It just as far as how long is it going to continue? I think, of course, nobody can predict the future, but from a real estate perspective, we can look at supply of new space, and we can look at job growth as the main indicator for filling that space, whether it's an apartment or a square foot of commercial office space. And when you look at the average amounts of space that are being delivered, although it's dramatic, it's still in line with the growth that we're seeing on the job growth side and population growth. So I can't predict, but right now I think we've still got room to run.
Diane, in terms of what you're seeing at City Hall and the amount of new projects coming your department's way, is the flow still really solid, or are you seeing any slowdowns?
Well, I'm probably not one to make a prediction, but from what I've seen for the first couple of months of 2015, in terms of we look, and I'm sorry to give all the kind of more technical kinds of things of issued permits and the value and all those kinds of things, but in terms of issued permits, it's higher than last year and the year before, which in my mind means these projects, they've put all the money into the construction drawings and spent all of that. These are the projects that are more likely to get built because they've gone this far, I think so. When you look at the permits coming in, construction permits coming in this year, it is, and this is only 2 months, quite a bit lower than last year. And so is that an indication that the ones, that there's a little slowdown for a couple years down the line? But if you go to the master use permits, which is the very beginning of thinking of a project, it's as high as ever. But those, I think, people will come in, hope that the market continues, they'll get as far as they can on that process because that's a very public process and it's a little hard to control the timing. So I think what they're doing is wanting to be ready if the market keeps going. So it's on the early end and the late end that we're still seeing it as strong. The middle part, but it's only 2 months indication.
And Craig, what are you seeing in terms of companies wanting to come here and fill up the space?
So we do this graph that takes into account all real estate metrics, and I was going to bring it here, but when I learned there was cameras, I said, nah, people might look back and say you're wrong. So, and what we do is we try and predict the cycles. And one thing we do know is the top of the last cycle was kind of 2007-ish. I mean, it depends on when you want to peg it. And most cycles here in Seattle have been 8 to 9 years, pretty consistently if you look back. So that puts us close to what would be the top of the cycle historically. But one of the things that I think adjusts for that is the recession we had was so severe that most companies really got lean and they really improved their algorithms, however you want to define that. And just as Greg said, as they move forward and they fill space, they're filling it very efficiently. When we were doing work for, say, Gates or Starbucks, they'd come and say, well, we think we're 200,000. And we wouldn't say it to them, but in our head we go, nah, they're really 400. Let's go look, and it would be true. Now when they come to us and they say they're 200, we say, they're probably 100. Because of the efficiency, the way that they've been able to work the spaces, the new kind of mobility, and the way the young kids want to work, you don't need as much space. So when you do fill that space, it's very strong, solid basis. So, and the other thing that you see that you didn't see back in the late 80s is when developers all went to build and the capital markets couldn't give them enough money fast enough, and you had an oversupply. Even though there's a lot of capital coming after the market here, you still have more discipline than you had in the past. If you look at underwriting as far as whether it's lease up, whether it's some kind of LTV, percentage of loan. So all of that says that the growth is more prudent. Because just because you have a lot of buildings doesn't mean they're going to be filled, right? That's your fear. But in this case, developers are more sophisticated. They're controlled a little bit more by prudent capital, I think, to some degree. Greg exception, of course. They're always prudent, doesn't matter. But in that sense, you have a very strong, solid base. And as we try and predict the cycle, we would say that you will stop seeing it go up probably sometime towards the end of 16, beginning of 17, but you're not going to see this. You're not going to see this huge correction. You'll see it be somewhat of a soft landing, and the reason for that is just what we showed earlier. The diversity of companies that are growing and that need employees, regardless of where interest rates go, is going to keep this economy very strong, and I would guess that you would be safe probably for at least 3 to 4 years.
So I have a really long list of questions, but we're running out of time. I wanted to talk about the linkage fee. I wanted to talk about district elections. That's going to be a Lulu, I think. But since we have limited time, and since we have these 3 people on our panel, I'm going to end up with this question before we go to Q&A. Greg and Craig, keeping in mind that you still have to get your permits, how would you rank Seattle, working with Seattle compared to working with Bellevue? Is it better, worse, about the same? And what could the city of Seattle do to make itself better in this regard? And we'll give Diane just a minute to respond if she desires. So why don't we start with Craig?
No, Greg.
First. This is a total setup.
Who has the most urgent permit?
Yeah, so I actually, the permits for Rainier Square are on Diane's desk, in effect, being reviewed. So you're really putting me on the spot, Mark.
Paul, yesterday, weren't you for a meeting?
Yeah, he's tracking me now.
Actually, I only ran into
but let
Cindy.
me address something that you asked about Seattle versus Bellevue. I think what you can say about working on either side of the lake is that the city governments reflect the character of each town, and each town's got a different set of values, different characters, different values in some way, shape, or form. It's very interesting in Bellevue, the diversity of that population over in Bellevue. You're starting to see that and feel that a lot more, and but both have great building departments. They have really committed employees, and they're both led by great people.
Is there anything Seattle could do to up its game?
Actually, I am also a client of
Come on.
of DPD in another way. I'm doing a renovation on my house in Seattle. I just got my permit on Friday.
Oh, right, I didn't even know about that.
So you know what Diane referenced earlier. This her staff. She's able to hire staff based on the fees that are coming in. And when you go into a down cycle, the reason has to be layoffs is there's just not enough fees being generated to pay them. And so when the upcycle comes back, the DPD's in a tough spot to respond to that stuff quickly. And I think you've done a great job in getting the thing ramped back up again. And now it's working as well as any endeavor of that type where you're serving the public in that way.
So we are going to open it up to questions from the audience. If you don't have any, I've got lots more questions to ask. So there's somebody right over there.
Jan Lee. Hi, thank you all. Diane, great to see you. So I'm all for growth. I think it's great. I love the prosperity that's happening in this town, but I worry that all those companies that need workers, those workers cannot afford to live here. So I want to know what's happening around the whole issue of affordable housing, and I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Should I start on that one?
Go ahead.
Okay. We share the same concern. And I think one of the things that as I listen to all this, Seattle is growing so well, and everybody wants to be here. Those are also leading to a lot of concerns, and you'll hear the mayor say this as well, in terms of a lot of people are benefiting right now, but not everybody is benefiting from that growth. And we also have seen the displacement. We don't track it because it's hard to, once people leave the city, we can't track them. But we know that that is happening, and the cost of housing is going up. We keep producing housing, but it's still going up. And so the mayor and council have put together what's called a Housing Affordability and Livability Agenda Advisory Group. We call it HALA. And I think some of you have been participating on that. There's something like a 28-member group, and there's also 7 working groups on different strategies. And the strategies are everything from the cost of construction and zoning to new resources and finances and tenant protections and a wide range of strategies, because we believe it's going to take many tools to help this. There's not just one silver bullet on this. So the advisory group is supposed to make the recommendations to the mayor and council. I think it's the end of May. And so, is that right, Sarah? Thank you. There are a lot of people who are working really hard on this right now. It is an issue that's extremely important for the city.
Don Kurth. I've addressed Diane on this. And here, with the downturn and coming out of the downturn, the city was addressing some of the density issues and also the affordable housing. And they came up with a fairly speedy process of doing the pod units. And it was very successful in regards to providing low-income housing or affordable housing. But yet this got shut down from a political standpoint. And so is this usually what's happened when something's there that works, it gets shut down?
Mark, you're not writing anything down, are you?
I'm recording.
Okay. So I guess I would say, I believe you're correct in that it was an affordable housing product that was being provided by the private industry, which is something that we've often said we really wanted to encourage. I think perhaps they went a little too far in terms of how many small units, how small they were, to the point that we did get a lot of backlash. And when it goes kind of too far one way, then council hears from a lot of people with concerns, and I gotta be careful what I say here. It moved quite a ways, so that we're hearing that we probably will not get units at $600, $700, $800 like those were. We won't get them that low. They're now probably in the 4 figures. But it's something that we need to keep looking at in terms of, was there something that we missed in those so that they will be more acceptable, but still have a product that can be more affordable. So, people are talking about the small units. People are still talking about small houses, other ways to address it.
The 2-sink requirement. 2 sinks for what, 200 square feet? They require 2 sinks for 200 square feet because it's inhumane not to have it. I thought that was, you didn't make that decision, the council did, but I was scratching my head. Last question.
From Bill Lowe.
My question, in some ways, follows on with the last one. You've talked about density and increasing the density in the city, but I think you're getting some pushback. So politically, or well, from a city standpoint or administration, it makes you want to increase the density, but I think many of the people who live here don't want to have that kind of density. And having been involved in projects where we've got pushback, I just wonder if you might maybe address that issue.
Sure. We are getting a lot of pushback with, because I think, in my mind, a fair amount of it is because we are getting so much development happening in certain neighborhoods. And it's not because we necessarily upzoned or those kinds of things. And how do I say this? Okay, so what we're looking at is how do we do density and have it more acceptable, and can we have the public transit that helps serve it, where we've got to make sure that there are alternatives to using your car, because the city's been really progressive in terms of its parking requirements, and that means that we have no parking requirements in our urban centers and our urban villages that are near transit. So we are seeing development that is happening without parking, or with maybe a 1 space per 2 unit kind of a space. And so people are getting upset because of the additional cars in their neighborhood. Many of these neighborhoods were actually already very congested 10 years ago, but it's a concern when they see more building being developed. So we are looking at density, we are looking at open space, we are looking at, transit, we are looking at the other things that need to come with that density.
That's all the time we have. Let's have a handful of panelists.
Seattle Rotary Online is made possible in part by a grant from First Choice Health, working with the Washington Health Information Collaborative to use technology to bring better health care to patients throughout the Pacific Northwest. First Choice Health,